The moment my daughter-in-law looked me in the eyes and said, "We only invited special people to the wedding," I realized something horrifying. For 3 years, I had been financing the lives of people who didn't even think I deserved a seat at their table. And what they did next after I stopped giving them money, God, I still have nightmares about it. Before I tell you what happened, subscribe to Sad Drama Stories and comment below. What would you do if your own child treated you like an ATM instead of a parent? Now let me explain how my son destroyed our family with 4 simple words. We only invited special people? The sentence hit me so hard I actually forgot how to breathe for a second. I stood frozen in my own living room holding my phone while my daughter-in-law Lena smiled at me calmly, like she had said something completely normal. Across the room, my son Max avoided my eyes entirely. God, that hurt worse than the words themselves, because silence from your own child always cuts deeper than cruelty from strangers. Yesterday, I whispered. You got married yesterday? Lena nodded casually while adjusting the pillows on the sofa I had bought for them 6 months earlier. It was a very intimate ceremony. Intimate, interesting word. Because apparently intimate still included her parents, her sisters, her cousins, their friends, just not me. Not the woman who had spent 3 years paying half their rent every single month. Not the woman who filled their refrigerator when they couldn't afford groceries. Not the woman who gave Lena $800 for her wedding expenses without realizing I was financing a wedding I would never even attend. God. I suddenly remembered the pale pink dress hanging in my closet at home. The one I spent $200 on because I wanted to look beautiful in my son's wedding photos. Photos I would never appear in. Max finally looked up. Mom, it wasn't personal. Not personal. God, people say the cruelest things so calmly nowadays. I laughed softly, actually laughed, because honestly, what else could I do? I saw the photos online, I said quietly. Silence. Lena's smile disappeared instantly. Interesting, so they really thought I wouldn't find out. I saw your parents there, I continued. I saw the champagne, the wedding cake, the reception. Max rubbed his forehead immediately. Mom, no, I interrupted softly. It's all right. And honestly, that scared me more than anger would have, because for the first time in years I felt nothing, no desperation to keep peace, no panic about upsetting them. No instinct to apologize for existing, just clarity, cold, clear clarity. I looked around the living room slowly. The television I helped them buy, the dining table I paid for, the curtains Lena picked using my credit card. God, their entire apartment suddenly looked like a museum of my own stupidity. You know what hurts the most? I asked quietly. Neither of them answered. It's not missing the wedding. I looked directly at Max then. It's realizing you were comfortable humiliating me. His face tightened immediately. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Silence. Again, always silence when accountability enters the room. Lena crossed her arms. Renate, you're overreacting. Overreacting. Interesting, women always become emotional whenever they finally stop accepting disrespect quietly. It was our wedding, she continued. We had the right to choose who we wanted there. Of course you did, I smiled gently. And now I get to choose who I continue helping. That landed immediately. I saw it happen in real time. Lena's posture changed. Max finally looked nervous, because suddenly they understood this conversation was no longer emotional. It was financial. God, and honestly, that realization disgusted me more than the wedding itself. Because neither of them looked upset about hurting me, they looked scared about losing support. Max stood quickly. Mom, don't do this. Do this. Interesting wording, like setting boundaries was some kind of attack. For 3 years, I whispered, I've treated you like family. Lena frowned slightly. We are family. I looked at her for a long moment, then softly, special family. Nobody spoke after that. The silence inside the apartment felt thick enough to choke on. Max stared at me like he couldn't decide whether I was serious or dramatic. Lena, meanwhile, looked irritated. Not guilty. I noticed that immediately. Interesting difference. Because people who feel guilty usually apologize first. People who feel inconvenienced start defending themselves. Renate, Lena sighed, you're making this much bigger than it was supposed to be. God. That sentence almost made me laugh, because apparently excluding your husband's mother from his wedding was now considered a small misunderstanding. I looked toward Max. My son, my only child. The little boy I raised alone after my husband died. The same boy who used to cry whenever I left him at kindergarten for 20 minutes. And somehow, that little boy became a man capable of watching his wife humiliate his mother without saying a word. When were you planning to tell me? I asked quietly. Max rubbed his face tiredly. We didn't know how. Interesting, because they somehow knew how to post wedding photos publicly within hours. We thought you might get emotional, Lena added. Emotional, God, that word again, the favorite weapon of people who want to hurt you comfortably. I nodded slowly. You're right. Both of them blinked. I am emotional, I admitted softly. Because I spent 3 years loving people who clearly only loved what I could provide. Max stood immediately. That's not fair. No, I walked toward the kitchen slowly, opened the refrigerator, completely full. Because 2 days earlier I had gone grocery shopping for them myself. Milk, eggs, fresh fruit, coffee Lena liked. God, I even bought the expensive yogurt she preferred. I closed the refrigerator carefully. How much do you two currently have in your checking account? Max looked stunned. What? How much? Silence. Lena crossed her arms tighter. That's private. Interesting, my money funded their life for years. But suddenly finances were private. Max finally answered quietly. About 300. God, $300. And yet somehow they afforded a wedding reception I wasn't invited to. I nodded slowly. Rent's due next week, right? Neither answered, because we all knew I already knew the answer. I had been paying half their rent for 3 years, $500 every month, automatically transferred from my account to theirs. Like a subscription service for disrespect. You don't understand, Max whispered suddenly. Lena's parents already don't like me. Ah, there it was, finally, the truth. They think I'm beneath them financially, he admitted quietly. They already believed I married into their family instead of earning my place there. God, for one horrible second I almost felt sorry for him, because suddenly I understood everything. The secret wedding, the exclusion, the embarrassment. He didn't hide me because he hated me. He hid me because I reminded him of where he came from, and honestly, that hurt even worse. You were ashamed of me, I said softly. No, too fast, too defensive, which meant yes. Lena stepped forward immediately. That's not what he means. Then explain it to me. Silence again. God, the truth always makes rooms quiet. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table. The same table I helped them assemble myself while Lena complained the instructions were confusing. Interesting memory to suddenly have. I spent $20,000 on you both, I whispered. Max looked down instantly. Mom, no, let me finish. My voice stayed calm, and somehow that calm frightened them more than yelling would have. I gave you money for furniture, for bills, for your honeymoon, for emergencies, for groceries, for your wedding dress. I looked directly at Lena then. And not once during all of that did either of you think maybe his mother deserves to watch him get married. Lena looked uncomfortable finally. Good, it wasn't meant to hurt you. God, that sentence. Like pain only counts when cruelty is intentional. I stood slowly and grabbed my purse. I should go. Max panicked immediately. Mom, wait. For what? We can fix this. Interesting, not we're sorry, fix this. Like the real emergency was whatever consequences might come next. I walked toward the door quietly, then paused. And without turning around, I asked the question sitting heavily inside my chest. If I stopped helping financially tomorrow, I swallowed hard. Would either of you still call me? Neither of them answered. God, that silence told me everything I needed to know. I stood there near the front door waiting, not for excuses, not for explanations, just for one honest sentence. But all I heard was the humming refrigerator and Lena's nervous breathing. Interesting, 3 years of accepting my money came easily, but saying, yes, we love you without it suddenly became difficult. Max finally stepped forward. Mom, don't do this. Again that phrase, as if I were the one breaking something. I looked at him carefully. When your father died, I whispered, you were 12 years old. His face changed immediately. Good, because I needed him to remember. I worked 2 jobs. I skipped meals sometimes. I sold my jewelry. I did everything possible to make sure you never felt poor. Tears burned behind my eyes suddenly. God, I hated crying in front of them, especially now. You know what I kept telling myself all those years? I continued softly. Max looked devastated already. That one day when you grew up, my voice cracked slightly. You'd become the kind of man your father would have been proud of. Silence. Lena looked away first. Interesting, apparently even she couldn't handle hearing this out loud. Max sat down heavily at the kitchen table. Mom, I love you, God. There it was, the emergency phrase, the sentence people pull out once consequences arrive. I smiled sadly. I think you love needing me. That landed hard because his entire face collapsed instantly. And honestly, for the first time in years, I wasn't speaking emotionally, I was speaking truthfully. Lena crossed her arms again. You're punishing us? Punishing, interesting. So refusing unlimited financial access now counted as abuse. No, I answered quietly, I'm protecting myself. Max stood again suddenly. Okay, fine. Yes, maybe we got comfortable, but cutting us off completely is extreme. God, extreme, not the secret wedding. Not humiliating me publicly. The extreme part was finally saying no. I looked around the apartment one last time slowly. The framed photos, the expensive coffee machine, the new television. So many objects purchased with my love disguised as money. I need time, I whispered, then I finally left. The drive home felt unreal. I kept replaying those 4 words in my head over and over. Only special people. Only special people. God, do you know what the cruelest part was? Not being excluded. Realizing they genuinely believed I would continue paying for their lives afterward. That's what finally broke something inside me. When I got home, the pink wedding dress still hung on my bedroom door. I stared at it for a very long time. Then slowly, I sat on the edge of my bed and cried harder than I had cried in years. Not delicate crying. Real grief. The kind that leaves your chest hurting afterward. I cried for my husband, for my younger self, for the mother who spent years confusing sacrifice with love. And honestly, I cried because deep down I already knew this wasn't really about the wedding. The wedding just exposed the truth that had been there all along. I had become useful instead of loved. That night I barely slept. Every memory suddenly looked different. Every "we miss you," every "you're like a second mom," every hug from Lena after I paid a bill. God, how much of it had been real. At 6 in the morning, I walked into my kitchen and made coffee quietly. For 40 years, mornings started with me worrying about someone else first. Max, my husband before he died, bills, responsibilities. But that morning, for the first time in years, I thought about myself. Interesting feeling, almost unfamiliar. Then my phone rang. Lena, I stared at the screen until it stopped. 10 minutes later, Max called, then Lena again. Then another message, Mom, please answer. We need to talk. Need. Interesting word, not we want to apologize, need. God, I suddenly understood something horrifying. The panic had already started, because rent was due in 5 days. A week after the wedding humiliation, Lena finally called, sounding desperate. Not annoyed, not defensive, desperate. Renate, she whispered quickly, the landlord is threatening us. God, I almost laughed. Because suddenly I was important again. He says if we don't pay this week, we could lose the apartment. Interesting, not how are you, not we're sorry, straight to money. I stirred my coffee slowly while listening to her panic. For 3 years, I had rushed to solve every emergency they created. Late rent, credit cards, car payments, groceries, and every single time I convinced myself helping meant love. But now I heard the truth hidden underneath every phone call. Need, just need. Renate, are you there? Yes. Relief flooded her voice immediately. God, that sound made me physically sick. Because she wasn't relieved, I answered. She was relieved the ATM still might work. We thought maybe you forgot the transfer, she continued carefully. Forgot? Interesting word. Like paying their bills was supposed to happen automatically forever. I took a slow breath, then softly. I didn't forget. Silence. What? I stopped the transfers. The silence afterward felt enormous, like the entire world paused for a second. Then Lena laughed nervously. Okay, but seriously. God. Apparently boundaries sounded like jokes to people who benefited from your lack of them. I'm serious. Her breathing changed instantly. Renate, we can't cover everything ourselves right now. Interesting. Because both of them were healthy adults in their 30s, and yet somehow my retirement money became their survival plan. I warned you already, I said calmly. I only help special people. Dead silence. God. That sentence tasted colder than I expected. And honestly, part of me hated using it. But another part, the wounded, exhausted part, needed them to feel even a fraction of what they made me feel. Renate, Lena whispered. You don't mean that, didn't you? Nothing, no answer, because suddenly the joke wasn't funny anymore when it belonged to them. We were always good to you, she said finally. God, I actually closed my eyes, the delusion. The absolute delusion. You excluded me from my own son's wedding. It was complicated. No, I answered softly. It was intentional. Lena's voice sharpened slightly. You're being vindictive. Interesting. So after funding their adult lives for years, I became vindictive the moment I stopped. I'm being awake. And honestly, that was the truest sentence I'd spoken in years. I stood slowly and walked toward the hallway mirror while holding the phone. God, I looked tired, not old, just emotionally exhausted. Like someone who spent years carrying people who never intended to walk beside her. You know what I realized this week? I asked quietly. Lena stayed silent. I realized neither of you were afraid of hurting me. I swallowed hard. You were only afraid of losing access to me. Her breathing hitched. That's not fair. Then tell me the last time you called without needing something. Nothing, again, always silence where genuine love should have been. Renate, please, she whispered desperately now. We're drowning financially. God, there it was. The truth finally naked and honest. Not we miss you. Not we love you. We're drowning financially. I looked around my small kitchen quietly. The same kitchen where I spent years calculating how much money I could spare after paying my own bills. The same kitchen where I skipped vacations, canceled salon appointments, stayed home alone so Max and Lena could live comfortably. And suddenly I felt angry, not explosive anger. Worse, the calm, terrifying kind. How much do you owe? 2 months' rent. Of course. What about the honeymoon? Silence. Then quietly, we used credit cards. God, these people built an entire fake luxury life using my stability as the safety net underneath it. And honestly, that realization changed something permanently inside me. Lena, I said softly, you and Max need to learn how to survive without me. You can't abandon us like this. I smiled sadly. Interesting. Because they abandoned me first, just wearing wedding clothes while doing it. 3 days later, Max showed up at my apartment crying. God, I hadn't seen my son cry like that since his father's funeral. The second I opened the door, he wrapped his arms around me tightly. Too tightly, like a frightened child instead of a grown man. Mom, please, he whispered. Please don't do this to us. Us, interesting, not me, always us now. Because somehow Lena's comfort had become more important than his mother's dignity. I gently stepped back and let him inside. He looked terrible. Wrinkled shirt, dark circles, panic written all over his face, and honestly, part of me still wanted to comfort him immediately. That's the horrifying thing about motherhood. Even after someone breaks your heart, your instinct still tells you to protect them. Max sat at my kitchen table while I made coffee quietly. The same table where he used to do homework as a little boy. God, back then his biggest problem was spelling tests. Now he was 34 years old and couldn't pay rent without his mother. Interesting how life works. We're behind on everything, he admitted quietly. I handed him coffee silently. Lena's furious. She says you're trying to control us financially. God, I almost laughed into my cup because people always call it control when the free money stops. You had no problem with my financial involvement before. That's not what I mean. Then explain it to me. Silence again. God, my son had inherited my habit of avoiding uncomfortable truths. Finally, he whispered. She thinks you're punishing her? Interesting, because apparently excluding me from the wedding was still somehow less offensive than me protecting my finances afterward. I sat across from him carefully. Max, I asked softly, if I had done that to you. He looked up slowly. If I secretly attended a major family event and excluded you completely. I swallowed hard. Would you ever trust me again? His eyes filled immediately. God, good, because I needed him to finally feel this. No, he whispered. Then why do you expect me to trust you? The room went silent again. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Interesting how rain always seems to appear during heartbreak. Max rubbed both hands over his face shakily. I messed up. Yes, he did, but honestly, the wedding wasn't even the worst part anymore. The worst part was realizing how comfortable he became watching me sacrifice for him endlessly. How much debt are you really in? I asked quietly. He hesitated. God, that hesitation terrified me instantly. Max, he finally whispered the number, 43,000. I actually stopped breathing for a second. What? His face crumpled immediately. The wedding, the honeymoon, furniture, credit cards, God. These people were pretending to live rich while borrowing against a future that didn't exist. And the entire time they assumed I would rescue them eventually. Why would you spend that much? I whispered. Max looked ashamed. Lena wanted everything perfect. Interesting, so perfection mattered more than stability, more than honesty, more than family. I stood up slowly and walked toward the sink because suddenly I felt dizzy. $43,000, God. And somehow they still thought I was the unreasonable one. She said her family would judge us if the wedding looked cheap, he admitted quietly. There it was, the real disease underneath everything: appearances, status, performance. I leaned against the counter silently, then softly, "So you excluded me because you were embarrassed by me?" His face broke instantly. "While secretly drowning financially yourselves." Max started crying again. Real crying this time, humiliating crying, and honestly, I finally believed he understood the damage now. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry, Mom." God, that apology hurt more than the wedding. Because this time it sounded real. I closed my eyes briefly, then quietly asked the question sitting inside my chest for days. "Did you ever love me separately from what I gave you?" His crying stopped immediately. Interesting. Because some questions are too honest to answer quickly. Max stared at me like I had slapped him. God, that question destroyed him more than losing money ever could. And honestly, part of me hated asking it. But another part, the exhausted, broken part, needed the truth finally. "Mom," he whispered shakily. I waited, not rescuing him, not softening the moment, just waiting. Because for years, I interrupted my own pain to protect his comfort. Not anymore. Finally, tears rolled down his face again. "Yes," he whispered desperately. "Yes, of course I do, God." The problem was I believed he thought he loved me, but people can love you and still use you. That's the horrifying part. Love without respect becomes selfish very quickly. "I think you forgot I was a person," I said softly. He looked shattered instantly. "You became so used to me sacrificing everything," I swallowed hard, "that eventually you stopped seeing the sacrifice at all." Silence. Max cried quietly at my kitchen table while I stood by the sink staring out the window. And honestly, the grief inside me suddenly felt ancient, like it had existed much longer than the wedding. Because once I started looking back honestly, I noticed patterns everywhere. The missed birthdays because Lena already had plans. The holidays where I paid for everything but somehow still felt unwanted. The constant emergencies. The guilt whenever I hesitated financially. God, I had mistaken being needed for being loved, and that realization nearly destroyed me. Then suddenly Max said something that changed everything. "Lena's parents think you're unstable." I turned slowly. "What?" He looked horrified immediately, like he regretted saying it already. "Max," he rubbed his face hard. "They think your reaction to the wedding proves you're emotionally dependent on me." God, I laughed, actually laughed. Because apparently the woman funding half their adult lives was now emotionally dependent. Interesting logic. "They told Lena you might become dangerous financially." Dangerous financially? What does that even mean? Then Max whispered the sentence that made my blood run cold. "They suggested maybe I should try getting control of your finances." Silence, complete, absolute silence. I stared at my son for several seconds, genuinely wondering if I heard correctly. "What?" His face collapsed. "They said maybe you weren't mentally well enough to manage money responsibly anymore." God, I felt physically sick, not hurt, sick, because suddenly everything made horrifying sense. The calls, the panic, the pressure. This wasn't just about losing financial support anymore. They wanted control. I sat down slowly before my legs gave out. "They wanted to declare me incompetent?" Max nodded weakly. I told them no. Interesting. The fact that he needed to tell them no was already horrifying enough. "When did this conversation happen?" "Yesterday." Yesterday. God, so while I was crying over losing my family, they were discussing whether they could legally access my savings. I suddenly remembered every time Lena encouraged me to simplify my banking, every question about my retirement accounts, every fake concern about me living alone. oh my God, I whispered out loud. Max looked completely broken now. I didn't realize how bad it sounded until afterward. No, he did realize that's why he came crying. Because for the first time, he finally saw what kind of people he allowed into our lives. What exactly did they say? I asked quietly. He swallowed hard. They said older women become vulnerable, that you were overly emotional, that someone should protect your assets before you got manipulated. Manipulated, God. The irony nearly made me dizzy. I looked at my son carefully then, really carefully. And for the first time in his entire life, Max looked afraid of me, not because I yelled, not because I threatened him, because he finally realized I was seeing everything clearly now. You sat there while they discussed taking control of my life. Tears streamed down his face immediately. I didn't know what to do. Interesting. Because silence had become his favorite hiding place. I stood slowly, then walked toward the hallway closet. Max frowned. Mom, I opened the top shelf and pulled down a thick blue folder, every financial record, every transfer. Every payment I'd made for them over 3 years. I placed it carefully on the kitchen table. Max stared at it in confusion. What is that? I looked directly into my son's eyes. The exact amount your wife's family owes me. Max looked down at the blue folder like it might explode. God, I don't think he ever imagined I kept records, because people grow careless when they assume your love has no limits. I opened the folder slowly. Bank transfers, receipts, wire confirmations, credit card payments, medical bills, furniture invoices, 3 years of sacrifice documented neatly in paper form. Total: $78,432. Max physically went pale. Mom, my voice stayed calm, too calm. The wedding wasn't the moment I stopped trusting you. I slid the folder toward him gently. It was the moment I realized none of this was temporary for you. Silence, heavy silence, the kind that changes relationships permanently. You built your adult life assuming I would always save you, I whispered. Tears rolled down his face again. I never meant for it to become like this. God, that sentence almost broke me, because honestly, I believed him. I truly think my son didn't wake up one morning planning to use me. It happened slowly. Comfort became expectation. Expectation became entitlement. Entitlement became dependency. And somewhere in the middle, he stopped seeing me clearly. I spent years trying to make your life easier, I said softly. But all I really did, I swallowed hard, was teach you I would survive any amount of disrespect. Max buried his face in his hands immediately. I'm sorry. This time I believed him completely, and somehow that hurt even more. Because sincere apologies can't magically restore trust once it's broken deeply enough. Then quietly I asked, do you know what I did after your father died? He looked up slowly. I worked morning shifts at the bakery, then cleaned offices at night. His face collapsed again. I slept 4 hours some days. I wore the same winter coat for 8 years. I skipped meals so you could have school lunches. God. I had never told him most of this before, because mothers often hide their suffering to protect children. But maybe that was my mistake. Maybe hiding sacrifice teaches people not to value it. I didn't regret any of it, I whispered. Not once. My eyes burned suddenly. But being excluded from your wedding, I looked away briefly, was the first time in my life I regretted giving someone everything. Silence, pure devastating silence. Then Max stood abruptly and walked toward me slowly. For 1 second I almost stepped back. Interesting instinct. He knelt beside my chair instead, like he used to when he was little and asking forgiveness after breaking something important. Mom, he whispered brokenly, I don't want your money. God, that sentence arrived far too late. I want my mother back. Tears finally slipped down my face again because despite everything he was still my child. And honestly, that's what makes betrayal from family so unbearable. Love doesn't disappear just because trust does. 2 months later, Max moved out of the apartment with Lena. The marriage didn't survive the financial collapse. Interesting how quickly perfect love dies once luxury disappears. Lena's parents blamed me entirely, of course. Apparently refusing endless financial support made me controlling. God, fine, let them think that. For the first time in decades, I stopped caring what people called me. Max started therapy shortly afterward. Real therapy. not the fake "I'm sorry" conversations people use to avoid changing. And slowly, very slowly, he began rebuilding his life honestly. Smaller apartment, second job, no pretending, and honestly, I became prouder of him during those difficult months than I had been in years. Because struggle finally forced him to become accountable. As for me, I did something shocking. I used the money I once spent rescuing everyone else to rebuild my own life instead. I traveled, joined a painting class, made friends again, started sleeping peacefully. God, peace feels so strange when you spent years surviving emotional exhaustion. Then one evening, almost a year later, Max invited me to dinner, just me, no Lena, no pressure, no emergencies. We ate at a tiny little restaurant near the river, nothing fancy, and honestly, it was perfect. Halfway through dinner, my son suddenly reached across the table carefully, then softly said, "You know, for a long time I confused love with sacrifice." I looked at him quietly, and now tears filled his eyes instantly. "Now I think real love should make people more responsible, not more dependent." God. That sentence healed something inside me, not completely, but enough to breathe easier. Enough to stop carrying all the grief alone. Before we left the restaurant, Max hugged me tightly outside under the streetlights, then whispered, "Thank you for finally stopping me." Interesting, because sometimes the most loving thing a mother can do is refuse to save her child from the consequences they desperately need to face. Before you go, comment below. Do some people only realize your value after losing access to what you gave them? And remember, the people who truly love you will never make you earn your place in their lives.